you are attending an institution where most students live on campus, then they are in that campus bubble that makes it really difficult to bring in different values, different belief systems. But if you are at a community college in multicultural Los Angeles, then you're going to have different morals, different values being brought to campus from people's lived experiences, which I think is going to actually help contribute to bringing down the temperature when it comes to some of the more radical behaviors that we are seeing at top tier schools.
Good evening. Welcome to Learning from Community Colleges, Methods, Meaning, and Misconceptions. This is a virtual event co-hosted by Heterodox Academy. I am Helen Benjamin. I have worked in community colleges as an educator for more than 30 years. Most recently, I served as superintendent president of Santa Barbara City College in California for about 9 months. But for 27 years before that, I worked in the Contra Costa Community College District and ended my career there as chancellor for the last 11 and a half years. So, as many of you know, HXA is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of over 5,000 members dedicated to improving the quality of research and teaching through promoting open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement. Tonight, I am thrilled to be hosting this event, which will be a conversation with 3 community college educators, and you will quickly see that we are definitely devotees. Our first member of our panel I'll introduce to you is Dr. Andrea Fabrizio. She's an associate professor and chair of the English department at Hostess Community College. She is also the coordinator of the Hostess Writing Across the Curriculum initiative. Together with Mark, just a second here, lost my place and reduced the size of my screen, which is not a good thing. But together with Mark Hostess, she leads the core books at CUNY, a 36-month Teagle Foundation sponsored project that originated at Hostess Community College and is now extended to 3 other CUNY campuses: the Borough of Manhattan Community College, LaGuardia Community College, and New York City College of Technology. This faculty professional development initiative aims to engage students in key humanistic questions while strengthening their reading and writing skills and bolstering student performance related to course learning objectives. Our second panelist is Dr. Gregory Marks, who is a professor in the Department of English's Hostess as well in the Bronx. He has been teaching, researching, and working with colleagues at the college since 2006. As previously mentioned, he leads the Core Books Project along with Andrea. A Rhode Island native, Greg received his PhD in English from LSU, my home state is there. He's lived and studied in New Hampshire, in Rome, in Texas, and of course in Louisiana. And our third panelist is Mark Urista. He's a full-time faculty member at Lynn Benton Community College in Albany, Oregon, where he teaches communication courses and advises the college's Civil Discourse program, which is the recipient of HXA's 2019 Open Inquiry Award for Outstanding Student Group. Mark's educational values, sense of purpose, and career trajectory began to develop when he attended his local community college. He regularly delivers presentations on free expression, viewpoint diversity, and civil discourse on his campus and at conferences. He is also the faculty advisor for Braver Angels College Debates and Discourse program and currently serves as moderator for the community college's Heterodox community. Before we turn to our panelists to hear what they have to say, to share about their experience and their thoughts, I'll give you a quick rundown of how we'll run this 1-hour session. I'll start with a brief introduction of the topic and speak a little bit about community colleges, their history, their mission, and impact. And then I turn to our panelists to share a bit about how they feel about colleges and their personal experiences. And then we'll enter into a discussion where I'll pose questions and have an open conversations about them about their approaches in the classroom and how they relate to our students. And we're asking you, though, to submit questions by typing them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen when you submit a question. It will be received by our behind the scenes team, who will elevate questions so that I can see them and then ask you the questions. And so we are going to begin with Mark Urista. I'd like for Mark just to share a bit about, since he's a community college graduate, about his experience as a community college student and the professional person he has become. Mark.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for joining us this evening. So my name is Mark Urista, and I'm originally from Torrance, California. In short, I was not the best high school student. I shuffled around multiple schools and ended up at a continuation school when I was 17. A few months before I turned 18, I realized that high school was not for me, and I was really focused on one primary objective. That was making enough money to move out of my parents' house and get an apartment. So I stopped going to school, picked up a second job. Fast forward a few years, a few odd jobs, a few couches that I slept on. And one day I'm hanging out with some friends playing Bond 007 on the old Nintendo 64 when one announces that they have to go to El Camino College to sign up for their fall semester classes. Well, because my vehicle was in the shop, I had no choice but to go with this individual. And once we arrived at El Camino, my friend discovered he had to take this thing called a placement test before he could sign up for any classes. Now, this is back in 1999. I didn't have a cell phone. I couldn't go on Facebook or make a TikTok video for the next couple of minutes. So I figured, well, I'll take this placement exam as well. And I did. I got my results back and found out that I was eligible for some classes. One of them was public speaking. Public speaking was something that I always seemed attracted to. So I signed up for it and discovered very quickly that college is much different than high school. I sincerely appreciated the fact that my instructor treated me as an adult. And I also discovered that I had a lot of decision making in terms of how my experience would unfold. The teacher would constantly stress, look, you don't have to be here. So ask yourself, why are you in college? Why are you willing to put in the time and energy to research these topics, put together these speeches? And that was such an important message for me to hear at that time in my life, because it started to make me ask the even deeper questions like, where do I want to be 5-10 years from now? And how can college help me get there? I had a great experience in public speaking and then took another communication class, argument and critical discourse. And I remember after leaving the class one evening, the teacher starts following me as I'm walking to my car, and he tells me that I should consider trying out for the speech and debate team. I did, I made it, and then this really remarkable thing happened in my life. I started hanging out with people, things called goals. You know, like I want to transfer to a university. I want to start my own business. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a physical therapist. And that really had a big impact on me at that time in my life, because most of the people I was hanging out with weren't really thinking about their future. They were just living day to day, paycheck to paycheck. So I got involved in the speech and debate team. I met some people who are still good friends to this day. I was able to go to their homes, get to know their families. And what was really remarkable about my school was that it was in the greater Los Angeles area. So it was getting me out of my bubble in the South Bay and taking me to other parts of Los Angeles and getting me to interact with people from different cultures and different backgrounds that I normally would not come into contact with. I had such a rewarding experience at El Camino that when I transferred to UC Berkeley, I realized that I wanted to dedicate myself to helping recreate experiences for students like the ones that I had that had put me on the right path. So my senior year at Cal, I started coaching debate at Contra Costa Community College in Richmond. And then I went on to University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, taught for a while at Modesto Junior College, moved back down to Los Angeles where I taught and coached at El Camino College as well as Cal State Fullerton, something I'm really glad I did because it solidified in my mind, I am definitely a community college teacher, not a university professor. And once I started applying for jobs, I was fortunate to get a position at Len Benton Community College, where I've been for the past 10 years. One of the things I really appreciate about LBCC is that there is a tremendous amount of ideological diversity. Something I often refer to our college as is Red County, Blue County Community College. Lynn County is a strong Republican hold in the state of Oregon. Benton County, home of Oregon State University, is a very progressive county. So there's a tremendous amount of ideological diversity on our campus, which allows us to try to find ways to create space for good, honest, authentic dialogue and genuine relationship building, like the kind I was fortunate enough to experience in El Camino can happen in our sphere. I'm incredibly privileged to work with administrators and colleagues who support these values. And now what I'm looking to do is just to connect with other members of our heterodox community so we can figure out practical ways to create other spaces that allow for these dynamic, rewarding conversations and dialogues to happen at our respective schools.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. And you can see from Mark's comments, and those of you who work in community colleges can really relate to what he shared about us, about the diversity we find in our students. He's one type, there are many, many types. And what I've found as a community college administrator in all these years, that our greatest challenge is also our greatest opportunity, and that is educating a more diverse group of students. We have students who come to us because we are open access institutions. Community colleges have been around for over 100 years, with the first one, Joliet, being founded in 1901. We have been serving students from all walks of life for over 100 years with a variety of goals and aspirations. And so we are really egalitarian in nature. Any student can come. We don't have requirements as such. We have students from 8 to 80, 89. And so that shows the diversity that we have and the great ability we have to reach people from this variety of backgrounds. And so with community colleges having a history that goes back to 1901 and thinking through these last 100 years, what I really am impressed with is how they grew. But that growth really became much, much greater after World War II because of the GI Bill. And so there you had all of these veterans who were eligible for higher education. It would be paid for them. And then when we look at our history, we see that that's when the tremendous growth of community colleges began all over the United States, because there was a need, so many students, and that need had to be fulfilled. And when you look at where we are today from 1901, we have 1,044 community colleges in the United States. And students enroll in credit and not-for-credit courses. And so we have 6.8 million students enrolling in credit courses and about 5 million in non-credit. And the average age, and our students are very different from, in some ways, than four-year university students. Our average age for our students is 28. We get lots of high school students who come in. Some come in knowing what they want to do. Some kind of wander around the curriculum, find themselves, and we have people to engage them, to help them to do that. And then, of course, we have all the technical programs, males, females, students of all backgrounds. And our tuition is affordable. Our average tuition is about $3,700 a year. When you look at four-year institutions, it exceeds $10,000. And so we have a variety of students, as I've indicated, the great diversity there, full-time, part-time, and the majority of our students work. And you just heard Mark share his path and all that he had to do and all the sacrifices he made, but he was still able to get through, and that's what happens with our students. So I just wanted to share that bit of history about us and our egalitarian nature and the commitment that we have to serving our students. And so Andrea and Greg did not attend community colleges, but they work in community colleges. So I just like to hear from them now about being professionals in community colleges and what drew them to community colleges and what keeps you there. Andrea, you want to start?
Sure, thank you very much. Well, actually, I came to Hostos Community College, which is located in the South Bronx, right down the street from Yankee Stadium, as a graduate student at the CUNY Graduate Center, as a Writing Across the Curriculum Fellow, which is a nice opportunity CUNY provides for graduate students to work on campuses, to work with faculty, to bring reading and writing into their courses. So it was an opportunity for me to get to know community college faculty as a graduate student, which was my first time in a community college. And it was just an amazing opportunity to work with faculty, to really think about what goes into assignments, what goes into your choice of readings, and how much those things matter. Because, with an assignment, you get what you ask for, right, from students. So the better you design the assignment, the better the product is going to be. And the more thought you put into the kind of reading you're giving, the better the students will do it. So it was really my first time thinking about the materials you bring into the classroom and how you make them accessible and how you make them meaningful for students and how you engage students. And through that work, I, just fell in love with both the passion of the community college faculty that put so much thought into what they put on their syllabi and what they bring into their classrooms, and also the energy of community college students. I mean, I remember being in college, I didn't have to I just went to class. Like I went to class, I did my work and that was it. And then here are the students that are holding down jobs, raising families, and still giving it their all every day in the classroom. And it was just really a magical experience. I fell in love with Hostos through that writing fellowship and was fortunate to then become an assistant professor and stay there throughout the years.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Greg?
Thank you. It's been really wonderful hearing both Mark and Helen discuss the kind of, Mark, I really like the way you emphasize kind of the transformative power of education, both on you, and I had that experience too. I was a terrible high school student, but then I got to college and it was just earth-shattering, the kind of transformation of engaging significant texts and significant thoughts. And then Helen, something you discussed is the diversity is just so important, and that's really, our school is Eugenia Maria de Hostos Community College. It's named after a 19th century political, literary theorist, philosopher, Eugenia de Hostos. And so it's really just wonderful. I had come from four-year liberal arts college, and then I taught at LSU for a while. And then I got a job in Louisiana, but my wife all of a sudden got a job in New York City at St. John's University. And so I tagged along. I taught at honors programs at small liberal arts colleges. I taught at big public universities, but just coming to the community college, it was just something very different. Andrew's already touched on it. It's the complexity of the students. They are so extraordinarily diverse, not only just ethnically and racially, but in their work backgrounds, in their life backgrounds, in their intellectual backgrounds, their ability to engage serious discussions. It might sound like a cliche, but our students really are extraordinary. Andrew and I have been on search committees, and one of the things that candidates always ask is, what do you like about community college? What do you like here? And it sounds like a cliche, but we go around the room and we always say, it's the students. It's the students. If you don't fall in love with the students' ideas, then there's something wrong with you. Then it's just really extraordinary. They come from many backgrounds. There's a huge immigrant population in the South Bronx. Obviously, it's extraordinarily poor. It's one of the poorest congressional districts in the United States. And so there are so many struggles, but the students are very eager to overcome them. There's a large Dominican community. The school was originally founded to serve the Puerto Rican community. There are an enormous number of West Africans. It's just a vibrant community. And the students just want to succeed, both in terms of socioeconomic mobility, but also just in terms of precisely the kind of humanistic questions that I think Mark and Helen and Andrew and I in our project are trying to do. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it's just wonderful to hear. And this is what people in community colleges say all the time about the work. It's the students.
Yeah.
And I know that each one of you has done some very creative work in reaching the students. And Mark and Greg and Andrea, I'm fascinated by your project. And I'd like for you to share some of what you do in your core books project and the funded by the Teagle Foundation. If you would share that with us now.
Well, Andrea, do you want me to start a little bit? But you stay on though and interject. Well, about 10 years ago, Andrea and I got a NEH grant, National Endowment for Humanities. And through that, we actually had some outside lecturers come in to discuss the humanities and the role of the community colleges. Because as we all know, nursing programs and rad tech programs and all these programs are very important and very significant. Pre-professional are very significant for community colleges, but really 40 to 50% of all students at community colleges are liberal arts majors. And so we thought it was important to inject these liberal arts questions into the community college in a little bit more systematic way. So through that, we met somebody from Columbia University, Roosevelt Montas, who then was the director of the famous 100-year-old core curriculum at Hostos. You know, the core curricula at University of Chicago, St. John's Annapolis. The core curriculum at Columbia, especially as articulated by Roosevelt, was just wonderful. And so he came over and gave us a few lectures, as did a few others from Columbia. And we just began an informal collaboration with him to bring elements of the Columbia core to our faculty cohort in English, but also especially to our students. So Andrea, you want to talk about the text selection and just what we expect and kind of the pedagogy behind that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that was really important to us in our project was not so much that students read the text that we selected and memorized important dates or memorized important authors or that kind of thing. What was important to us was that students read these texts and saw them as entry points into big humanistic conversations, questions that all students, think about. What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? What is an education? What is love? These are questions that everybody wonders about and that people have been wondering about for thousands of years, right? So we saw these texts, especially in the composition classes where we placed them, as entry points into this conversation, as empowering for our students. So in our curriculum, again, in a composition course, we really put a lot of thought into the pacing of the text. So whereas Columbia has like 30 texts in a year, we have 4 in a semester, right? We really slowed down the pacing. And in the way we presented them, the curriculum really focuses on these entry points about getting students first to write a lot about these ideas and concepts, to close read, to really hone in on the themes the texts present and to be able to participate in that conversation. So, so much of our curriculum relies on multiple opportunities for students to think together, to write together, to gather their thoughts on paper, and to kind of scaffold their entrance into these texts so that they could really grapple with them and then come away with their own thinking of it. So that's the curricular thinking behind it. And we've been able now to expand this project beyond Hostos into a larger grant with the 3 other campuses at CUNY, BMCC, New York City Tech, and LaGuardia. And we're very excited that we're able to create this community of practice with our students, in the classroom, that students are reading the same thing at the same time as much as we can get them to, right? And community of practice with faculty. So often faculty, we're in meetings all day about, assessment or reopening plans, as we're all talking about, right? But we don't get to talk about teaching, right? So to create that community of practice with faculty has really been, I think, one of the hallmarks of our project.
Yeah, one of our colleagues said it was like being in a good graduate program again, just to sit around the seminar table discussing these important texts.
And what are some of the texts? And I'm just curious about whether the students had ever come in contact with any of the texts that you're using and how they responded to those.
So in our English classes, we have 2 classes we pinpointed, English 110 and 111. So our comp that deals with nonfiction and our comp that deals with fiction. So in our nonfiction class, we started off with the trial and death of Socrates. We did founding documents like the Declaration of Independence. We did What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Women. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk. So that's our English 110. And then in 111, we've moved the text around a little bit, but Antigone, Song of Solomon.
Exactly.
And for most
Homer,
students,
Shakespeare's Macbeth. Our students, and again, it's hard to tell because some of them are a little bit older immigrants who have quite a lot of experience with educational background. Some of our other students really struggle with sort of fundamental skills. As we always like to point out, some of our students have admitted that this is the first time they've been asked to read a book cover to cover. So they literally sometimes aren't familiar with, table of contents, glossary, index, that sort of thing, footnotes. So it's a wonderful discovery for them, and it gives them a sense of accomplishment. And so what we do is, and so a lot of our students have certainly heard of the American documents, but to be able to read them thoroughly and make them grasp the ideas and and make them judge the American documents, And so one of the little projects I always do is, what's your favorite amendment of the Constitution? And it's always surprising what they say. A lot of them they like the 4 freedoms of number 1. A surprising number of our students like number 4, no search and seizure. And it's like, okay, does that because it speaks to them, or are they being kind of a libertarian? So so again, there's a kind of viewpoint diversity, but it's that engaging with these significant texts that brings up these fundamental human questions about, what is a human? Do I have rights? What's it, and I just finished Macbeth. And so it's all about, blood and power. Is that distinct from justice? Or when we're doing Antigone, one of our colleagues really she said a great way to approach this text would be to talk about the rituals of the dead first. And so we asked them to reflect on their own rituals of the dead in their culture. And so, my gosh, there's a broad diversity of how you serve the dead in their culture. And then after we do that kind of conversation, the kind of pre-reading conversation, we engage them in the Antigone text, and they say, my gosh, these people have been discussing this topic for 2,000 years. And then they get to precisely build the skills through reading, writing, and discussion, which is, so again, as Andrea pointed out, our classes, because budgets and credit hours are always in short supply at community colleges, we don't have this is not a separate honors program or a separate curriculum. These are texts which we are embedding in pre-existing courses, such as first year seminar, composition courses, writing about literature, that sort of stuff. But to bring these kind of, Rosa Montas at Columbia has helped us bring these kind of significant human questions to a student body that is sometimes not really invited to this table about these significant questions.
Okay, thank you. That really sounds, what do you think, and it's embedded in what you've said, it sounds as though, I know it is very successful. And what do you think accounts for the success of the program?
I think that one of the major appeals of it is that, again, this community of faculty and giving faculty an opportunity to really think together about teaching and create a coherence to what's being taught. I think that's something that, teaching often happens in sort of isolation, and it shouldn't, right? That we're all doing kind of our own thing and going to our classes and teaching what's on our syllabus, so that to be able to have a community that you go to and say, hey, I'm teaching this today, and so am I, and what are you using? And I'm using this, and to be able to do that. And then to be able, we've done it at our campus, when we were on campus, brought students together across sections into one larger room and team taught classes from time to time. And, for students to be able to see how one thing they're learning in one class connects to another. And then even in our English classes, they'll often say, oh, I'm learning about this in sociology. I'm learning about this in my history class. And those connections. And that's what college, one of the most wonderful things about the college experience is seeing how everything ties together, how things relate to one another and affect one another. And I think this curriculum helps students to see that. And also for the students, I think all students, but particularly our students sometimes feel almost like imposters in school, like they don't really belong in college. They come with skill deficits and as Greg said, not having read a book from cover to cover. And I think creating this community where they're together and reading together and participating in these big human questions, right? Shows like you belong here. You are a college student. This is as much for you as it is for anybody else. And I think that kind of cycle of between the students and faculty, that energy makes it successful.
Yeah, and then they're applying what they're learning to their own lives and seeing the relevance of something written hundreds of years ago or centuries ago. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
We've all had that transformative, that book that just did something to us,
yeah,
that changed us.
sure.
And so we wanted to try to get maybe that experience to some of our
Mhm.
students.
Yeah.
We read Mary Wollstonecraft one semester, and one student blurted out, she's like, I wish I would have read this before I got married. So they do. At first, they look at the syllabus and like, why are we reading this old stuff? But then as we go
Right.
through, they do really see the relevance and the
They
connections
really
to their lives.
see, you can just see the growth before your eyes,
Yeah.
I'm sure. So, Mark, I'm going to move to you now to hear a little bit about what you're doing with your Civil Discourse Club, and then the fact that you won an award. And I'd like to hear a little about the award too, but tell me about your Civil Discourse Club.
Sure. Well, I think we need to start with the origin, which was a controversial artwork series at our college. I'll save you the vivid details and just describe it as multiple images of two guys very graphically having sex. And I'm sure you can imagine, being in a very public location, this raised quite the controversy at Red County, Blue County Community College. But just so happened that term I was teaching an argument and debate class, and I had two students tell me that they wanted to argue for removing the artwork series in their upcoming debate assignment. And I had to point out to them that the debate assignment requires two students being assigned one topic where they had to prepare arguments for both sides, because right before the debate occurs in class, we flip a coin to decide who argues for and who argues against the proposition. So I told them, as long as you're willing to agree to those conditions, we can use the topic. So they did. And a few days later came to my office and said, Mark, we still don't like that artwork series, but we realized there are a lot of problems if it's taken down. And they started talking about censorship and the importance of free expression. So we ended up having a debate in the class, and something I'd never seen before, the entire class rose and applauded the students at the end of their performance. And we had a really awesome conversation where students said, we've been thinking about this, but we haven't had the opportunity to talk about it because we were afraid we'd be attacked or judged or labeled. And afterwards, the students said, that was awesome. We need to do this again, but for this time for the entire campus community. So I recruited two other students, and we created a debate on whether or not the artwork was appropriate using our college's board-approved values. And the really cool thing about working with these four students to organize this debate is they realized on their own, they did not want to have a debate with a winner and a loser. They simply wanted to have a debate where all the viewpoint diversity that was happening in respective echo chambers on our campus could be expressed openly for the consideration of our campus. The event was a big success. Afterwards, numerous people came up and applauded the students for their bravery. And they also said, you need to continue to facilitate dialogue like this in the future. So that's what led to the origin of the Civil Discourse Club. Afterwards, we started doing roundtable discussions. We created a whiteboard that is in a very public area on our campus, where every single week students will come up with a question like, should colleges mandate students to receive the COVID-19 vaccinations? And then people can write their responses while also following the etiquette that we have in order to ensure that good, thoughtful dialogue happens, rather than something that can just be distracting, hateful, or non-conducive to an educational experience. We've also taken students to town hall meetings with our congressional representative, Pierre DeFazio, both US Senators, Jeff Merkley and Ron Wyden. We've also hosted speakers from an amazing organization called the Village Square that brings people with different backgrounds together to model civil discourse and teach it to communities. One pair that was a big hit on our campus was Red Mom, Blue Mom, two women from Colorado who have politics that the other absolutely despises, yet somehow they still figured out a way to be good friends and have their kids play together. And we also started working with the organization Braver Angels. In 2019, we were recognized by the Heterodox Academy as the top student group of the year. And what I'm really proud of is last year, the club was formally approved to become a co-curricular program. So now I'm actually able to create independent study opportunities for students at our college and offer talent grants. You can think of them as scholarships for students who are willing to be leaders in our program. The goal there is to help students develop practical experiences that complement their education and also give them something very practical to talk about on a job interview one day. The ability to create, organize, and facilitate civil discourse activities, and also just a lot of specific concrete examples of them working with people who are very different, who think differently than them, but are still able to all come together and achieve a goal.
Yes, and that I can see the similarity in what you do, the similarities in what you do and what is happening at Hostos with those students. And that's what an education is supposed to do. It's to cultivate us, to make us think deeper, to look at least be able to think critically. And it seems in both of these programs, that is what is happening. And so thank you so much for that work. And so when we think about community colleges and our topic, learning from community colleges, our methods, our meaning and misconceptions. And so we see in these two programs that there's a lot of work, and especially with the faculty and working together, as Andrea was mentioning in the program at Hostess, this opportunity to get out of isolation and to work with each other and to see how the students benefit. I'm wondering, Andrea and Gregory, whether or not you follow any of the students, if this influences the students. And I know these are probably not, these people aren't majoring necessarily, but if you've ever done any tracking with them to see what happens later or how they, if any of what they do with what they learned, if it influences them in various ways as they move along. And the same for you, Mark, with your students.
Our assessments were, as far as retention and just those little semester to semester things, were mildly better for our students. But I think we did the Office of, we didn't do it through the Office of Instructional Research. And so this probably can't quite use that. As far as we've only been doing it for 18 months in the broader system. And unfortunately, COVID has thrown up, since the whole point was to have communities of learners and communities of faculty together. COVID has put something of a damper on that. And I have to say the Teagle Institute has been extraordinarily generous and flexible and understanding regarding regarding those. But that kind of assessment is going to be important going forward. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that's wonderful to be able to track it. So everything right now is informal, but you've been able during COVID, I'm sure, to continue using the text in your classes.
Yes, absolutely. And actually and we have to say that, again, especially our younger, more tech savvy faculty are extraordinarily good at getting on the internet and I mean, there are just extraordinary opportunities and resources on the internet. To do Macbeth, I just came across Ian McClellan when he was like 20 years old, giving a wonderful reading of the Tomorrow Speech. And so I had my students look at that. It's only a minute long and it was such wonderful. And so, so yes, we certainly are fully engaged. And actually we're going to be having a website up soon that'll be fully make these materials available to everyone.
Okay, so I'll start now with a couple of questions from our audience members, and thank you so much, members of the audience, for these questions. This one, I am curious about the relationship between the diversity of community colleges and the great books nature of Andrea and Greg's program. Why are ancient texts relevant to students from diverse backgrounds? First part of the question. And second, why do Andrea and Greg choose to teach these texts rather than texts from around the world and by authors of color?
I think the question of why relevant is a fantastic question, and it's one that we have our students answer, right? We read the text, and one of the things we do at the end of each one is ask them, do you think this is relevant? Why is this relevant? And students generally do see the connections, again, that a text like, the Trial and Death of Socrates about, what is beautiful, or how do you make choices of judgment of things that are not objective, right? The subjective things, how do you make those judgments? We still grapple with that. How do we define justice? How do we define freedom? How do we define these things? We still haven't figured it out quite. So the texts are relevant and that they help us think through those questions. And the other question about the diversity of the curriculum is one that we worked with on our own campus with curriculum. Again, the Columbia core curriculum it has, I think, 60 books over 2 years, if I'm remembering correctly, Greg. Right. And when we whittled it down to 4, we tried our best to choose texts that were more diverse out of those, that showed a diversity of viewpoints. So again, like I said, we have women's viewpoints, and we tried to incorporate as much as possible people of color from that. But again, I want to also mention that the texts that we use, you don't have to just do those, right? We encourage faculty to supplement with other things they want to bring in that might be more contemporary or more modern, that speak to those texts and put them into conversation. So that's, it's not such a lockstep curriculum. There's room for faculty to bring in other voices and other texts that fit. Right,
and we encourage that also, because it's just very important that faculty, faculty want to teach what they want to teach also. So so on the one hand, it's a good balance to have that kind of universal qualities of the older texts, right? Which are not, and again, we don't venerate them simply because they're old, but because part of it might be a little bit of an argument from authority that, well, Columbia University is doing it, so what can be wrong there? But it's just, frankly, they have the resources and faculty and abilities to converse with us. So that would be one argument. I think the other argument might be that whether we like it or not, we're immersed in precisely this sort of discourse, the discourse of rights, the discourse of identity, which is still so extraordinarily important. Know thyself. We're still immersed in that kind of discourse. And so I think it's helpful for students, including our immigrant students who are very passionate about being in America. I think it's important to bring that in. As far as across the world, yes, so we've had presentations on Gandhi and others. In the future, we hope to build on that, but I think we're kind of, at least from my perspective, my own talents didn't quite go there. So I don't know. So I'm hoping in the future.
Okay, thank you. The next question is directed to me. My institution is having difficulty finding a superintendent president who understands that civil discourse and open inquiry are critical to college campuses. That's interesting. How can faculty encourage candidates who believe in these principles to apply for our superintendent president position and our board of trustees to hire them? Now, I have about 5 questions I need to ask this person before I can answer it, but I'll do my best. You're having difficulty. I'm curious about first of all, what your job announcement looks like that's going out. What's in it? What are the qualifications you're looking for? Not the qualifications, but the characteristics of the person. What are you saying you want the person to do in the job? You have to have a job announcement that appeals to a broad audience. What is the reputation of your college? That has a lot to do with who applies for the job. How do people feel about it? What does it look like out there in the world? Is it appealing to people who, does it have a reputation of being open? There's a lot that goes into that. And then with the, to apply, and then for the board of trustees to hire them, well, you probably know that the one position in your college that reports, or for which the board has responsibility, is the superintendent, president, CEO, president of college, or whatever the job title is, and it's within their purview. It is my hope that boards get input. That's typically what happens in these search processes, that they get input from the campus community about what they would like to see in a leader for the college at the top of the organization. And hopefully that happens and there's some conversation. But I don't want to say a whole lot more because I don't know what college it is or what the situation is. But that job description is very important. That's the face you're putting out there to applicants. And if they don't see things in that job announcement that appeal to them, they won't apply for that job, in my opinion. And in my search work too, I've discovered that. So the next question is, with such diverse student bodies, does that make it harder or easier for community college students to build community and understand each other, both in and out of their classes? One of you want to tackle that one?
I'll take a shot at it. That is a great question.
It is.
I think it's one of the things that is one of the major strengths of the community colleges is that diversity. And I think that going back to the kind of text that we're teaching, I think that's one of the things that works nicely in the classroom is that when you get a question like, what is freedom? That's not, everyone wants to talk about that question. That question cuts across everything, right? So that there are certain questions that can build community just by the fact that they're so universal. So I think that the more we can find curricular opportunities that talk about things that everyone can relate to, it helps build community, and to see how these terms like justice or freedom or love or education, identity, how they get interpreted differently by different groups of people, and how those are defined by different groups of people, but also common. And that creates a really engaging and exciting conversation that everyone feels a part of.
I'll let Mark go. I'll let Mark go in a second, but I just want to add to what Andrea said. It's almost as if by meditating on these kind of universal and more universal elements, everyone's differences and precisely the wonderful diversity is somehow foregrounded, ironically. And so that's what I've noticed, that the student from the Ivory Coast and the student from the Dominican Republic have a discussion about this, about political power, and somehow discussing this universal fact somehow brings precisely out their diversity in a much more glorious way. It's very wonderful. But Mark.
So I have a slightly different angle that I'm going to take with this question, and that is the challenge about building community. One of the hardest things about achieving that goal is that we work on commuter campuses. Most students show up, they take their class, and then they need to take off. So something that I think is crucial for all instructors to recognize is that the moments where students are most engaged and most likely to connect with others are within the classroom. So if you truly care about building community and enhancing engagement on campus, that is where to start. And if you can build enough community, if you can build enough engagement, if you can have assignments that really turn students on, that sometimes can motivate them to join a club or a co-curricular or go to an event on campus. But I can't stress enough how important it is to start in the classroom when it comes to building community.
And I agree. And I'd like to add to that. I think the question was, with such diversity, does it make it harder or easier? I think it makes it easier in lots of ways. We have the challenge of our students being commuter students and not living in dorms on campus where they're kind of forced into seeing each other. But there are so many activities on community colleges, and every community college with which I've been involved has had a student activities office. You've got the clubs, you've got affinity groups, you've got all kinds, and they meet in these places, not only in their classrooms, and then there are clubs related to the curriculum. And so they can connect in those ways too. I really do think it's easier. The diversity makes it easier, and they can find, because what we found about community college students is that many students who have not been successful in high school at all, at community colleges, they become successful because people pay attention to them. They get attention they've not had before, believe it or not, even with the huge numbers of students we have enrolled. I will move quickly to the next question. Let's see, many conversations about viewpoint diversity and open inquiry seem to focus on elite campuses and the controversies that have occurred there. What are the obstacles to viewpoint diversity at the community college level? In what ways are community colleges uniquely equipped for viewpoint diversity?
So I'll jump in right away and quote Jonathan Haidt. He seems like a pretty popular figure amongst heterodox types. Something he points out is different moral universes that people live in. And if you are attending an institution where most students live on campus, then they are in that campus bubble that makes it really difficult to bring in different values, different belief systems. But if you are at a community college in multicultural Los Angeles, then you're going to have different morals, different values being brought to campus from people's lived experiences, which I think is going to actually help contribute to bringing down the temperature when it comes to some of the more radical behaviors that we are seeing at top tier schools.
Andrea, Greg, any response to that one?
No, I totally agree. And going back to Mark's original point from a minute ago, the classroom is so important. A lot of students see that as very much of a free space where they get to speak their mind, precisely regarding viewpoint diversity, and so especially regarding when we do political texts or the Platonic texts that have to do with for example, the myth of the cave, whether you see things correctly, just that kind of epistemological questions precisely go into the kind of civil discourse of how do you view things. So many of the texts we chose have that kind of, am I seeing things the right way? So the myth of the cave, Du Bois' image of the veil, of double consciousness, but also the veil that the Black man wears. Is that kind of is that a good thing? It's a veil. Veils are beautiful. So is that a good thing, or does that somehow occlude his vision? And so I think the diversity, I agree with Mark, that the diversity precisely is a necessary precondition for that kind of civil discourse to be allowed and to flourish.
And I think, as we've seen all over the nation in the last year, in terms of viewpoint, with the kinds of political activities that we've been having on all our campuses, these different viewpoints, and people have had to open up and listen to all sides of of any argument, especially in this world in which we live now around the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And because we have such diversity, we have no choice. We've had no choice in this last 15, 18 months, but to honor those viewpoints and to have these discussions in a kind of fashion as Mark was describing with his social discourse. There's no longer, we can no longer not have the discussions. And when you say that you want all voices to be heard, I mean, that's something that we say all the time. Do you really want to, what do you know what that means? And I think community colleges have been having those discussions around those viewpoints, especially when you get into liberal and conservative views. Mm-hmm. Each person is entitled to his or her own opinion, and we've had to open up and listen and have those debates. And I think that's what makes us equipped. I don't know about uniquely equipped, but we've had to deal with them and with those issues, I think, in ways that we haven't had to before the George Floyd incident, mm-hmm. for sure. Mm-hmm. So the next question, how do teaching methods vary between community college and other community colleges and other institutions? Could you say something more about the impact of age diversity in the classroom? How do older or non-traditional students bring a unique perspective? Does this diversity add any difficulties or complexities to teaching?
No, about the age difference, it's funny in New York City, there's been a kind of a demographic shift when I got there 15 years ago. Then you really did, it was kind of a quote traditional community college demographic of people, getting a second, working at a community college so they could get a side gig, to get a better certificate so they could get a raise. Since then, at least in my experience, it's very much now we get the majority of our students come straight out of high school. And so there is some diversity, age diversity in a sense. I mean, you have to get used to having a mother have her child occasionally in the classroom, and that's just wonderful. It's not really allowed anymore. But again, it just speaks to the kind of struggles that our students oftentimes, they're extraordinary multitaskers. And so they just take, so the classroom is just an opportunity to focus, if they can briefly, on that kind of learning community. Andrea, what else have you got? Have you got anything?
No, I think what you said is absolutely right. I mean, we do have, our demographic has shifted to a younger demographic in recent years. But even within that demographic, like you said, we have parents in the classroom, we have people who are holding down jobs in the classroom. And I think that brings a richness to the conversations that take place in class, the different, life perspectives. And, in terms of how things are approached in the classroom, I think just one of the things we were really in tune to at the community colleges is what students need to be able to succeed with the material, right? I think that's just a question that we always have in the forefront of our minds before we start any unit is, what are the needs here? What's going to be the obstacles and how can we prepare so that students can overcome those obstacles in these units? I think that's something that is really important in our teaching at the community college level.
Right, at a 4-year residential college, you can basically just assign the text and you figure it will get read, in a day or two, and then you can quiz them on and have them do a 4-page paper by the end of the week. There's just a diversity of skills and a diversity of viewpoints in community colleges that your pedagogy that you're teaching, that the instructor just has to be aware of. And so I'm just always amazed at my colleagues who are just able to do that, extraordinarily quickly. And so the diversity of the students is wonderful, and it requires a similar flexibility on the part of the instructor. What about you, Mark?
I was going to say, at my community college, we're actually seeing the opposite trend. Our college president refers to it as the birth dearth. If you look at birth rates in the United States, they've been declining. So that means we're drawing less students from high school, and we're actually being incredibly proactive about reaching out to older students, many who have recently lost their jobs in our local area. So it is getting us to rethink how we go about teaching, and also how specifically we accommodate people who typically have full-time jobs and also family responsibilities.
Right.
I will just add, though, one of the things I absolutely love about teaching at a community college is the age diversity. It's something I personally benefited from as a student, was having good conversations with people who had been around the block, in their 30s, and could give a young guy some advice. And I've also found the older students say they really appreciate being able to connect with the younger students. I recently had a mom who said, I've been having a very difficult time communicating with my teenager, but being in this class and doing group projects has helped me get a better idea of how young people think. And, on top of some of the things we've been learning in interpersonal communication, I now have the tools in order to improve my communication with my kid.
I just wanted to add that I think that diversity of preparedness that Greg was talking about, and the diversity of skills that students bring is often misunderstood as a lack of ability, right? And I think that's just a really important distinction that I think all community college faculty would make, right? Is that our students, for wherever they're coming in, whatever age they are perfectly able, right, to do the work that's expected. But there's different skill sets, and that's the beautiful work of being a community college faculty member is figuring out how to meet those different skill sets and the different entry points that our students are at.
Okay, thank you. We're at the end of our time, and so I want to thank our panelists for joining us and sharing their insight, their wisdom, and for all of you who are with us for taking the time to join as well. Before we wrap up, I want to share a few exciting announcements. HXA recently opened nominations for the 2021 Open Inquiry Awards. These awards honor the institutions and individuals doing the complex work of improving classrooms, campuses, and scholarship. More information on the awards and the nomination process can be found on the HXA website. If you enjoyed tonight's conversation, please visit HXA's website to learn more about other upcoming events and workshops. Thank you again for joining us. I want to thank the people also who asked the questions. They're very challenging questions, and we appreciate them very much. And we hope to see you again soon. Have a good evening, everybody.